It was at Rowdy's, a country establishment a mile outside of town. She was sitting with two other girls, and as soon as I looked at her, I knew I just had to try it. Otherwise, I would regret it forever. The band was Without a Net, and they were playing a two-step. I walked up to their table and asked her to dance. She smiled, said that it would be a pleasure, got up and went out onto the floor. She felt good in my arms. We suited each other. It was as if we were made for each other. I learned that her name was Amanda, but she preferred to be called Mandy. The deuce ended, and the guitarist said, "Everyone hits the dance floor for the electric slide." Slide was followed by Tush Push, and we stayed in the room for both songs. The group then took a break, and I walked her back to her table and her friends, and she invited me to join them. I was introduced to Pam and Shelley, and they found out I was Augustus Weaver, but I preferred Augie over Augustus. Mandy asked, "What brings Augie Weaver to the roadie on this beautiful summer evening?" "I just wanted to dance tonight." "You wanted to dance but came without your girlfriend?" "I don't have one, but I don't need it to dance." "Why don't you have a girlfriend? Is there something wrong with you?" "No, as far as I know. I just travel a lot and am never here long enough to get into a relationship." "What do you do that makes you travel so much?" "I sell weapons and constantly go somewhere to make sales or train people on our products." It was a complete lie. In fact, I was Sergeant Augie Weaver, serving in the Army and having 3 days leave. But I learned from personal experience that the local ladies were not very kind to soldiers, probably because when they were interested in a guy, he was transferred to another unit, and they were left behind. Before they started digging any further, I asked them what they did, and Mandy told me that they were nurses at a local hospital who wanted to relieve the stress of working with the sick and suffering and have a little fun. Before the conversation could go any further, the group returned, and Shelley said, "My turn," and we went out onto the floor. After that, I had to let Pam have her turn. When I brought Mandy back onto the floor, she asked, "Am I losing you to these sluts?" "Hardly. When I walked through the door and saw you, for some reason, I immediately knew that you were the one I should be with. When I approached the table to ask you to dance, I was scared to death that you would refuse. Your fears were unfounded. As soon as I saw you, I had the same feelings. Let me grab my purse and let's get out of here." Going outside, she said, "There's a motel across the road. It's not easy for me at all, but I have a feeling that I should lock you in there right now." I felt the same way, so I took her hand, crossed the road, and rented a room. In the room we undressed, then sat on the bed and began kissing like excited teenagers. "Make love to me, Augie." And I did. This was our first sex, and I hoped that there would be a continuation. We fell asleep, exhausted, and clinging to each other. We woke up and continued again, then went to a nearby diner called Mom's. I'm not kidding. It was really called Mom's. While we were eating, Mandy asked me what I wanted to do that day, and then I replied, "Find someone to marry you." And she laughed. "I'm ready, but it can't be that fast. I have to tell my mom, and she'll want to plan the wedding. Think about what we can do while you drive me home. I have to let my neighbors know that I'm okay." Roommates, Shelley and Pam. Shelley was driving last night, so you have to take me home. I took her home, and my life became hell when we walked into her apartment. Shelley and Pam were in uniform, with gold second lieutenant bars on their collars. As I said, it was a surprise, and not a very good one. I looked at Mandy and said, "I thought when you said you were nurses at the local hospital, you meant the county hospital." For our service, the official hospital is the local hospital. Give me a minute to change, and then we can go. She left the room, and as soon as she left, I turned to Shelley and Pam and told them, "Tell her that I'm very sorry and that I will never forget her." I turned and left. Why? Because Mandy was an officer and I was a soldier, and the Army would never allow us to have a relationship. It hurt. It hurt a lot. But it didn't hurt as much as it would have if we'd gone deeper before we found out. The desire to leave killed me. She was the only one. I knew it as soon as I saw her, but we had no hope. If I had only served for a short time and was close to being discharged, we would have managed, but I served only a year after my second draft, and I still had almost 5 left. I had a 3-day vacation and didn't have to come back until the next day, but I lost interest in anything. So I came back early, which surprised a lot of people because no one had ever done that. For the next 2 months, I cried silently every night thinking about Mandy and what could have been. Then something happened that I hoped would never happen. At the shooting range, the private was stupid with his weapon. For some reason, he was turned away from the target and his rifle was pointed in my direction when one of the other sergeants saw this, tapped him on the shoulder, and told him to keep his weapon pointed down. The slap scared the guy, and he reflexively pulled the trigger. The bullet went through the fleshy part of my left calf. It didn't hit the bone, but the blood came out like a bucket. I was rushed to the hospital, and the first person to come see me was Shelley. She gave me a hostile look and said, "I should let you bleed for what you did to Mandy, but asshole or not, it's my duty to help." I just looked at her. "What's the matter, asshole? Nothing to say?" "No, ma'am. Nothing to say, ma'am." "Well, I'm not going to tell her you're here because I don't want her to get blamed for what she might do to you. But you better pray that somehow she doesn't find out." But of course she found out, and it wasn't as bad as Shelley thought. Mandy just looked at me for about 15 seconds without saying a word, and then she said, "How could you? Didn't you think it killed me too? I still cry at night thinking about you. You'll never know how much you hurt me, Augie. The man who owned my heart from the moment we met left me without saying a word, leaving me thinking that I was just a fly-by-night to him. I'm more sorry than you can imagine, but I'm a realist. As soon as we entered your apartment that evening and found your neighbors in uniform, I knew we were finished. You know as well as I do that the Army will never tolerate an officer dating a private, let alone being married to one. We could find a way." No, they couldn't. As soon as the Army found out about this, and, one of us would be transferred as far away from the other as possible. If I was close to the end of my term, we could try. But I still have almost 5 years left of my term. Before she could say anything, the doctor, the captain, came in and asked, "How is the patient, Lieutenant?" "I haven't looked at his chart yet, sir. I was discussing a personal matter with Sergeant." He gave her a strange look, looked at my card, then took off the bandage and looked at my leg. "It looks like you won't be marching for a while, Sergeant, but you should be able to return to limited duties in a day or so." He turned to Mandy, told her to bandage the wound, and then wanted to see her in his office. "Yes, sir." She silently applied the bandage and, having finished, looked at me for a long time, and then said, "We'll talk about this later," and left the room. But we didn't talk about it later, at least not in the hospital. 45 minutes after leaving, the doctor returned and began immediately. "This place is not that big, so you won't have much privacy." I overheard 2 nurses talking about the private Lieutenant Mandrake was hanging on to, and when I walked into the room and she said she was taking care of a personal matter, I assumed you were the private. When she came to my office, she confirmed this. I ordered her to stay away from you while you're here. From what I've heard, you've been estranged from her ever since you found out she was an officer. This is true?" "Yes, sir. My experience is that in matters of the heart, what is right and what is wrong is often ignored or overlooked. Lieutenant Mandrake is one of my best, and I can't afford to lose her. I'll talk to your commander about this, so don't be surprised if you're suddenly transferred somewhere far away from here. I'm sorry it turned out this way, Sergeant. I really am." A day later, I was released, and when I reported to my unit, I was transferred to light duty. 2 days later, I was told to report to the company commander. When I got to his office, the first sergeant told me to come right in. I entered, stopped 6 steps from the table, saluted and said, "Sergeant Weaver is here as ordered, sir." He saluted and said, "Calm down, Sergeant. I assume you know why you're here." "I roughly know, sir." "When Captain Byers called me and said that I had to send you out of position and why, I told him that I could not do it because I could not afford to lose an employee of your level. He was not happy to hear this, so the good doctor went higher, and I received orders from the battalion to transfer you. How's your Japanese?" "Sir, you are being sent to the 187th, to Japan." "How much time do I have, sir?" "I'm afraid not. Sergeant Meadows will give you orders when you leave this office. I have given you 10 days grace on your journey, but you must leave the location today. Have questions? No, sir. Good luck, Sergeant. Thank you, sir. Free. I came to my senses, saluted, grimaced, and left the office. The first sergeant handed me the order and said, "It's a shame you're leaving, Augie. It's a pity to leave, Tom. It's not my choice. I was kicked out of here just because I met the woman who was meant for me. I left the location at 6 o'clock and was furious. What the hell right did the Army have to punish me for falling in love? And I didn't kid myself that it wasn't a punishment. When I arrived at my next unit, I had no doubt that my new commander would be thinking, what kind of a freak is this Weaver, since he was kicked out of the unit and sent to me? I'll have to be on my guard. By the time I picked up my car from where I had to park it, I decided to say, "Fuck you, Army." I called the number I had for Mandy, and Pam answered. "This is Augie, Pam." "Is Mandy busy?" After a couple of seconds, "Augie?" "Yeah, baby." "I just received an order to transfer me to Japan. Dr. Byers wants me to be as far away from you as possible. My orders give me a 10-day delay in travel, and I would like to spend this time with you if possible." "You're sure?" "I don't want to cause you any trouble. I'll accept whatever trouble they want to give me if I can spend time with you." "At Rhodey's in half an hour. See you there?" I went to the Beta V because they had weekly rates, got a room, and then put on my civilian clothes. I was waiting for Mandy when she arrived at Rowdy's, and she ran into my arms. We had a drink and then went to the motel. We made love and talked and made love and talked for 8 days, and then I got on a bus to Fort Lewis, Washington. On the bus, I thought about our conversations. We were both realistic. She couldn't resign for another 2 years, and I could only get out of my service, which had a little less than 5 years left, by doing something that would lead to a transfer to the reserve on less honorable terms. And I wouldn't do this. In the end, we decided that we would endure and get together whenever possible. As a conscript, the Army didn't care what I wanted, but as an officer, Mandy could request assignments and sometimes even get them. We decided that as soon as I found out where I would serve, I would inform her about it and she would try to get an assignment somewhere closer to me. We had a hard road ahead of us and we knew it, but under the circumstances, it was all we had. When I arrived at Fort Lewis, I was told that it would be 17 days before the next ship sailed for Japan. Since I was temporary and not permanent staff, I was able to get a pass almost every night, and I reported this to Mandy. She agreed to take a vacation and spent 10 of those 17 days with me. 2 days after she left, I found myself on the USNS Marine Lynx, bound for Japan. The ship docked at Sasebo, and from there I was transported to the U.S. Army Base Camp Chickamauga in Beppo, Japan, where I was assigned to the 187th Airborne Infantry Regiment, part of the American Occupation Forces. After settling in, I texted Mandy, told her where I was, and crossed my fingers and prayed that she would get a transfer to a U.S. Army hospital in Tokyo. My fears about the consequences of the punishment turned out to be unfounded. I was received as any other soldier being transferred to another duty station would be received. A week later, I received a letter from Mandy. She had no luck getting transferred to Japan. On June 25, 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea, and Harry Truman decided to intervene. The Army landed in Busan and began moving north. The 187th, which was part of the 187th Airborne Regimental Combat Team, was put on alert, and we were waiting to be sent to Korea. Then God decided that he needed to mock us again. I received a letter from Mandy telling me that she had finally secured a transfer to the 8167th Army Hospital in Tokyo, and we would soon be together again. The next day, we were transferred to Kimpo Airfield in Korea. A month later, we made a successful parachute landing near the cities of Sukchon and Suncheon to try to capture members of the North Korean government who had fled Pyongyang and free American prisoners of war who were being transferred to the Manchurian border. None of these goals were achieved, but it all ended with the battles of Suwon, Wonju, and Yinye. Then we were removed from the front line and sent to the rear to be re-equipped. I received a letter from Mandy telling me she was in Japan, and I was thinking about seeing if I could get injured badly enough in my next flight to be sent to hospital in Japan. But luckily, I pulled my head out of my ass before doing such a stupid thing. On Good Friday, March 23rd, the 437th Airlift Wing, flying C-119s, dropped us off at Munsan-ni. We were landed to create blocking positions to cut off the Chinese and North Koreans, who were retreating after fighting for the Pusan perimeter. We occupied the terrain necessary to create blocking positions and immediately entered the battle. As the enemy retreated towards Uizhongbu, they attacked us fanatically, supported by accurate artillery fire. One of these attacks was so fierce that we were forced to retreat and create another defensive position. I noticed that Privates Brown and Smith were not with us. I looked back and saw them on the ground, obviously wounded, about 50 yards from our position. I shouted to the guys to cover me with fire and ran towards them. Smith was clearly the worst of all, so I picked him up on my shoulder, carried him to our position, and then returned for Brown. I picked it up, and as soon as I returned to our position, something knocked my legs out from under me, and everything went dark. When I came to, I was in an ambulance with 3 wounded and was going to, as I later learned, the 8067th MASH, Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. There, they stripped me and injected me with something that knocked me out. I later found out that I was unconscious for a little over 5 hours. When I came out of this state of pain, I looked back and saw the nurse standing with her back to me and croaked, "Water." She turned around and I thought I was either dead and in heaven or still asleep and dreaming, because Mandy was the nurse. She rushed towards me, hugged, and kissed me, and then handed me a glass of water with a straw. I noticed that she had a serious expression on her face, not a happy one, and I croaked, "What's happened?" "Nothing good, Augie. We had to amputate your left leg." I stood up and looked down, but I couldn't see anything because my lower half was covered with a sheet. Looking up, I saw that I was in a large tent full of beds on which the wounded lay, and doctors and nurses were walking around, caring for them. I was surprised that Mandy hugged and kissed me in front of them. I fell back onto the bed as a wave of pain hit me. Mandy knew the look on my face. She hurried away and came back with a hypodermic syringe, gave me an injection, and I passed out. When I came to my senses, I asked for water again, and the nurse who gave it to me shouted, "He's awake, ma'am." Mandy came over and asked how I was feeling. "Pain in my left leg and my left foot itches like crazy." "You don't have a left leg, Augie. I already told you about this. What you feel is called phantom limb pain. It will take you time to get through this. The bad news, at least for me, is that you will be evacuated to a hospital in Japan." She saw the question on my face and said, "It's bad news because I'm finally with you and they're going to take you away from me. This is simply unfair. Look at it this way, love of my life. The Army doesn't need an infantryman with one leg, so I'll get a medical exemption. Soon I will become a civilian, and nothing will separate us. If, of course, you can be happy with a man who only has one leg." She grabbed me, hugged me, kissed me, and cried on my shoulder. When she pulled away, she said, "These are tears of happiness, you big fool. I hope you understand that what you just said was a proposal, and my answer is yes. Hell yes." It didn't happen right away. I was transported to Japan and, from there, to Walter Reed. I was fitted with an artificial foot and underwent physical therapy before being discharged. I returned home to Detroit, got a job at the Ford Rouge plant, and waited for Mandy to join me. She completed her service in Korea and retired. I was waiting for her as she came down the slide from the Douglas DC-3. She rushed towards me and hugged me as if her life depended on it. Holding me close, she sobbed on my shoulder, muttering, "I never thought that this could happen. I never believed that this would happen. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We got married and lived happily ever after. Of course we got married.